It started like something small, almost ordinary, but in my heart it felt like the beginning of a storm I had been waiting for my whole life. I never thought a simple drive-in could turn into the night that changed everything. The glow of the giant screen, the smell of popcorn in the air, and the way my chest tightened when he looked at me, it all felt unreal. I didn't know if he felt the same, I didn't know if I was reading too much into the silence between us, but then his hand slid over mine, soft and trembling, and suddenly the whole world felt different. The night began with a nervous excitement I couldn't quite put into words. I had been waiting for this moment for weeks, ever since he asked me if I wanted to go out, just the two of us. My chest felt heavy with anticipation as I paced around my room before leaving, checking myself in the mirror over and over again. It wasn't about my clothes, not really, it was about me wanting him to see me as someone worth remembering. I wasn't sure if this was a date, not in the way people usually say it, but something in his tone when he invited me told me it meant more than just a casual night. By the time I got into my car, my palms were sweating against the steering wheel, my heart beating louder than the engine itself. I kept rehearsing conversations in my head, little jokes, small stories, anything that would keep us from falling into awkward silence. I wanted him to laugh with me, to feel comfortable, to know that I was someone he could open up to. When I finally pulled up to his house, I saw him standing outside, leaning casually against his front steps. The streetlight above him cast a soft glow on his face, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. He looked different that night, not in clothes or style, but in presence, like he carried with him a kind of quiet energy that I was instantly drawn to. He smiled when he saw me, that gentle smile that always made my stomach twist, and he slid into the passenger seat like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment too. The drive started slow, the radio humming in the background while we talked about small things, school, work, movies we wanted to see. It felt safe, easy even, but underneath every word was something else, something unspoken pressing against us. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual, my mind racing with questions I was too scared to ask. Was this just two friends going out, or was it the beginning of something neither of us dared to name? When we pulled into the drive-in, the giant screen already glowing against the dark sky, the parking lot was filled with scattered cars, couples sitting close in their own little worlds. I parked a little farther back, where the light was softer and the noise felt distant. He looked at the screen, then at me, and for a second I thought he was about to say something important, but instead he just asked if I wanted popcorn. I laughed nervously, relieved and disappointed at the same time, and handed him some cash. As he walked toward the snack stand, I sat there, staring at the windshield, trying to calm my racing heart. I wondered what people would think if they saw us here, if they'd know what this night really meant. Part of me wanted to hide, but another part, the louder part, wanted to let the whole world see that I was sitting here with him, sharing this night. When he came back with the snacks, the smell of butter filled the car, and he handed me the warm box like it was something more than food, like it was a piece of the evening he wanted me to hold. We sat in silence for a while, watching the previews, the glow of the screen painting his face in flashes of light and shadow. I kept stealing glances at him, trying not to be obvious, but every time his eyes met mine, I felt a spark of something I couldn't ignore. There was tension in the air, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was alive, like the moment before a storm breaks. I told myself not to overthink it, to just enjoy being there, but deep down I knew this night was different. It wasn't about the movie, or the popcorn, or even the drive-in itself. It was about us, sitting side by side, hearts stumbling over themselves, trying to figure out what came next. And in that quiet space, with the hum of the projector in the distance and the soft sound of his breathing next to me, I realized I didn't need to know all the answers yet. I just needed to let the night unfold, one heartbeat at a time. The movie started, but I couldn't focus on the screen. The voices of the actors blended into the background, their words echoing faintly while my mind was caught somewhere else entirely. The glow of the film flickered across his face, and I found myself memorizing every detail, the way his lips curved slightly when he smiled at something, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the way his chest rose and fell in a calm rhythm that I wished I could match. I tried to tell myself to relax, to just enjoy the moment, but my body betrayed me with every quickened heartbeat and every shallow breath. He shifted slightly in his seat, leaning back against the door with his arm resting casually along the edge. That small movement sent a wave of warmth through me, because even though it was innocent, the space between us seemed smaller, more fragile, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I reached into the popcorn box just to keep my hands busy, my fingers brushing against his once, and even that fleeting touch made my chest tighten. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let his hand linger there a little longer, not fully touching but not leaving either, as if he too was testing the water. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore, it was charged, heavy with the weight of everything we weren't saying. My thoughts spun wildly. Should I move closer? Should I wait? Was this even what he wanted? I had spent so long imagining moments like this, but when it finally arrived, I was paralyzed by the fear of ruining it. Still, my body seemed to move on its own. I shifted slightly toward him, pretending to get comfortable, my shoulder brushing lightly against his. He didn't move away. Instead, he tilted his head toward me, so close I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. My breath caught, and I stared straight ahead at the screen, though I couldn't have repeated a single line of dialogue if I tried. The world outside the car didn't matter anymore, it was just him and me, trapped in this fragile bubble of possibility. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Every small movement, every shared glance, every stolen brush of fingers became magnified, like the universe was slowing time just for us. I could sense something building, like a tide rising slowly, pulling us toward a shore we couldn't see but both longed to reach. Then, almost casually, his hand slid over mine. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't dramatic, it was soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. My heart nearly stopped. His skin was warm against mine, his touch light but deliberate, and in that moment the rest of the world disappeared. I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes, and in them I saw the same mixture of fear and hope that I felt inside myself. He didn't speak, and neither did I, because we didn't need to. That simple touch said everything. I squeezed his hand gently, and he squeezed back, and it felt like a silent promise, a shared secret that belonged only to us. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, completely and unapologetically seen. The movie played on, but it became nothing more than a soundtrack to the night. All I could think about was the way his thumb brushed slowly across the back of my hand, steady and reassuring, as if telling me it was okay to let go of the fear, okay to just exist in this moment without questioning it. The butterflies in my stomach quieted, replaced by a deep warmth that spread through me, grounding me in a way I hadn't known was possible. Sitting there, in that dark car with him beside me, I realized this wasn't just about a drive-in or even about a first date. It was about connection, about the kind of closeness that makes the rest of the world fade away. And as the night stretched on, I knew something had shifted between us, something that would never go back to the way it was before. The movie was halfway through, but time felt like it had taken on a different shape, bending around us in slow circles that only we existed in. I was aware of the laughter and murmurs from cars nearby, the occasional sound of a car door closing or someone dropping a soda, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the way his hand fit over mine, warm, steady, and sure, as if he had been holding it for years. Every minute that passed like that made it harder to remember the version of my life before this night. I glanced at him again, trying to catch his expression without being too obvious, but he caught me looking. He didn't smile in that teasing way I half expected, he just looked back at me, his eyes soft, almost vulnerable, as though he too was surprised by the way this simple touch had turned the world upside down. For a moment, we didn't look away. The flicker of the movie screen lit up his face in waves of light and shadow, and I realized I had never seen him this close, not like this, not with every unguarded emotion showing through. Something in my chest tightened so deeply it almost hurt, a mix of fear and longing and disbelief that this was really happening. I wanted to speak, to say something that would give words to what was rushing between us, but my throat felt locked. Instead, I squeezed his hand again, firmer this time, like I was afraid to let go. He leaned slightly toward me, so close our shoulders pressed together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. My mind was racing, yet my body felt calm, like it knew exactly where it was supposed to be. The silence inside the car grew heavier, but it wasn't uncomfortable, it was a silence full of questions we both already knew the answers to. He shifted again, this time turning more toward me, his knee brushing against mine. That small point of contact sent a rush of heat through me, and I could feel my breath falter. I stared at the screen, pretending to watch, but all I could feel was him. Every inch of space between us seemed to vanish, replaced by a closeness that made my chest ache with something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in so long. My thoughts spiraled, what if this ruined everything? What if tomorrow he regretted it? What if tonight was just a mistake we would never talk about again? But then his thumb brushed softly against the back of my hand again, slow and deliberate, and all those thoughts melted away. That simple gesture told me everything. He wasn't unsure. He wasn't pulling away. He wanted this as much as I did. My heart raced as I turned my face toward him again. His eyes were on me, steady and searching, like he was waiting for a signal, some kind of permission that it was okay to move forward. And in that suspended second, I realized how badly I wanted him to. Not because I was desperate for the moment, but because being near him felt right in a way I couldn't explain. The tension between us thickened, and I felt myself leaning just slightly closer, barely a shift, but enough that the space between us thinned to almost nothing. My mind screamed with 1,000 words I couldn't say, but my heart drowned them all out with one truth: I wanted this connection, no matter what it meant, no matter what tomorrow brought. And just as the thought settled deep inside me, his shoulder pressed more firmly into mine, his breath brushing faintly against my cheek. The world beyond our car was loud with laughter and sound, but inside it was quiet, intimate, almost sacred. Nothing else existed but him and me, two hearts stumbling in rhythm, daring to believe this moment belonged to us. The movie had ended a while ago, but neither of us moved to leave. Cars around us were already pulling out, headlights cutting across the dark lot, but we stayed frozen in our little world, as if leaving would somehow break what we had just discovered. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't filled with hesitation or fear, it was thick with unspoken words that pressed at the edges of our lips, waiting to spill out. His hand was still wrapped around mine, and though the film was over, he hadn't let go. That alone told me more than any confession could. I could feel the warmth of his skin seeping into me, steady and grounding, and I realized I didn't want to move, not yet, not when everything felt so fragile and perfect at the same time. He finally turned toward me, his voice quiet but certain, as if he was afraid of breaking the spell. He told me he hadn't felt this way before, not with anyone. The words hung in the air, trembling, vulnerable, and my chest tightened because I felt the same but didn't know how to say it. My throat felt dry, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it, but all I could manage was a whisper telling him he wasn't alone in this. The relief in his eyes was immediate, softening into something so raw and honest it nearly undid me. He shifted closer, his knee pressing against mine more firmly, his shoulder leaning into me until our faces were only inches apart. I could see the uncertainty in him, the fear that maybe this was too much too soon, but I didn't want him to doubt it. I let my hand tighten in his, steadying us both, and in that closeness I felt something unshakable begin to grow. We didn't kiss. Not yet. It was something even more intimate, something I hadn't expected. He laid his head gently against my shoulder, and in that simple act, my whole body lit with warmth. It wasn't about passion, it wasn't about rushing, it was about trust. The weight of him leaning against me felt like the most natural thing in the world, as though he had always belonged there. I turned my head slightly, resting my cheek against his hair, breathing in the faint scent of his shampoo, and it made me smile without meaning to. For the first time in years, I felt safe, like I didn't have to hide a single part of myself. Minutes passed like that, the world outside disappearing, until the lot was nearly empty. Only a few cars remained, their engines humming softly in the distance, but neither of us moved. He finally murmured that he didn't want the night to end, his voice muffled against my shoulder, and the words struck me so deeply I could barely respond. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that I wished we could stay in this car forever, suspended in the comfort of knowing we had found something real, but instead I just nodded, holding him closer, letting my silence say what words could not. The night air was colder now, condensation forming faintly on the windows, but inside the car it was warm, alive with a quiet energy that wrapped itself around us. I thought about how fragile this was, how the world outside would never understand what this moment meant, but here, hidden away in the dark, none of that mattered. It was just us, two souls stumbling into something unexpected, something tender, something that might change us forever. The air inside the car had grown heavier, not with discomfort but with a kind of closeness that felt almost sacred. We had sat there long after the movie ended, long after the lot had begun to empty, our silence speaking louder than words. His head was still resting lightly against my shoulder, and every breath he took pressed gently against me, steady, warm, and grounding in a way that made me want to freeze time. I kept my hand over his, fingers laced together in a grip that felt unbreakable, not because of strength but because of choice. Every second we stayed like that deepened something between us, something I didn't know how to name but didn't want to let go of either. The windows had begun to fog slightly, the cool night outside mixing with the warmth of our bodies inside, and the blurred glass made the world beyond us disappear. It was like we were sealed away in our own universe, untouched, safe, hidden from the chaos of everything else. He lifted his head after a while, slowly, almost reluctantly, and when he looked at me I could see a softness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. It was more than attraction, more than curiosity, it was trust, and it knocked the air out of me. He opened his mouth as if to say something but then stopped, biting his lip nervously, and I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to tell him he didn't need to explain, that I understood already, but before I could, he let out a shaky laugh, the kind people give when they're trying to mask how scared they really are. He said he had been afraid of this, afraid of what it might mean if he let himself feel what he was feeling. His voice cracked slightly on the word afraid, and hearing that nearly broke me. Because I knew. I had been living in that same fear, the fear of being seen, the fear of being hurt, the fear of stepping into something that could change everything. I told him I felt the same way, that every part of me had been caught between wanting this and running from it, and saying it out loud felt like tearing down a wall I had been building for years. His shoulders relaxed, as if hearing me admit it lifted a weight off of him too, and for the first time that night, we smiled at each other not with nerves or hesitation, but with relief. That smile became a kind of bridge, pulling us closer without either of us moving, and before I realized it, our foreheads were leaning gently together. The closeness was overwhelming. I could feel his breath against my skin, short and uneven like mine, and my whole body tingled with the electricity of being this close, not just physically but emotionally. The world outside might have thought this was small, but to us it was everything. He whispered that he didn't want to hide anymore, that being here with me made him feel like maybe he didn't have to, and those words sank into me deeper than I expected. They echoed in my mind, wrapping themselves around all the pieces of me that had been waiting, hoping, aching for someone to say that. I whispered back that neither did I, my voice trembling but true, and when our fingers tightened together again, it felt like a silent vow. We stayed like that, pressed forehead to forehead, eyes closed, breathing each other in, for what felt like forever. It wasn't about rushing forward, it wasn't about proving anything, it was about finally allowing ourselves to exist in this fragile, beautiful space without fear. And in that stillness, in that quiet moment where only our hearts spoke, I knew with a certainty that scared me and thrilled me at the same time, this was only the beginning. The night had stretched far beyond what either of us expected, but neither of us moved to end it. The lot was almost empty now, the glow from the giant screen dimmed, and yet we lingered, wrapped in the quiet that surrounded us. His forehead still rested against mine, and our breaths mingled in the small space between us. I could hear the faint thudding of my own heartbeat, and it matched the rhythm of his uneven breathing, as though our bodies were trying to fall into sync. The closeness was intoxicating, not because it was new, but because it felt inevitable, like we had been moving toward this moment long before tonight ever happened. When he finally pulled back, it was only slightly, his eyes searching mine in a way that made me feel completely bare. There was no hiding, no mask, no safe distance left. He asked softly if I believed this could be real, his voice trembling, more like a confession than a question. I swallowed hard because I knew what he meant. We both lived in a world where moments like this were fragile, where the thought of being seen or judged carried shadows over every step. But I nodded, forcing myself to meet his gaze, because I needed him to know that despite the fear clawing at my chest, this felt more real than anything I had known. His shoulders sagged with relief, and I saw something shift in him, a loosening of chains I hadn't even realized he was carrying. He leaned back against the seat, but his hand never left mine. Instead, he squeezed it tighter, his thumb moving slowly across my skin in circles, grounding both of us. We sat there like that, in a silence that wasn't empty but full of everything we didn't have the courage to say out loud. I thought about the weight of secrets, how they had shaped so much of my life, how they had forced me to shrink myself, to hide the parts of me that longed to breathe. And then I thought about this night, about the fact that in the span of a few hours he had unraveled so many of those fears without even trying. He wasn't just holding my hand, he was holding the part of me I had buried the deepest. I turned toward him again, this time with less hesitation. My free hand brushed lightly against his cheek, and he froze, not in rejection but in surprise. His skin was warm beneath my fingertips, and the way his eyes fluttered shut made my chest ache with something tender and fierce all at once. He whispered my name, and the sound of it broke me open in ways I couldn't explain. For so long, I had been terrified of wanting this, of needing someone this much, but hearing my name fall from his lips like that made me realize there was no going back. I let my hand linger there, tracing the line of his jaw, and when his eyes opened again, they were shining in the faint light. We didn't speak, because words would have ruined it. Instead, we leaned closer, our faces separated by only a breath, not rushing, not forcing, just letting the gravity between us pull us in. The moment felt endless, suspended in air, like the universe was holding us still just to make sure we understood the weight of what was happening. My heart hammered against my ribs, my body trembling with equal parts fear and desire, and yet I didn't pull away. Neither did he. We stopped just shy of what came next, our noses brushing, our lips almost touching, but it was the restraint that made it powerful. It wasn't about taking, it was about knowing we both wanted this enough to wait, enough to let the moment stretch until it carved itself into memory. When he finally leaned back, his forehead pressed against mine once more, and he whispered that he was scared but that he had never wanted anything more. His honesty hit me harder than any kiss could have. I whispered back that I was scared too, but that maybe fear was proof of how much it mattered. Our hands tightened together again, a silent promise in the dark. The night outside was fading, the stars beginning to dim as if warning us that morning would come soon, but for now, in that car, in that fragile, fleeting pocket of time, we were infinite. The sky outside had begun to shift, the deep black of night softening into the faintest trace of gray, a quiet warning that our night together was running out. I didn't want to notice it, didn't want to think about how soon the world would demand we return to the version of ourselves we showed everyone else. Inside the car, though, time still felt paused. His head rested against mine, and our breaths were tangled in the silence. Neither of us spoke for a long while, because the truth was too heavy, and the fear of breaking the fragile spell was stronger than the need for words. I could hear the distant sound of crickets outside, the faint hum of a highway miles away, and it made me realize how hidden we really were. It felt safe, but it also reminded me of how quickly safety could vanish. He shifted slightly, turning toward me again, his eyes tired but filled with something that made me catch my breath. There was a softness there, a quiet pleading, like he wanted to hold on to this moment as badly as I did. His hand, still linked with mine, trembled just enough for me to notice. He asked, in the softest voice, if I thought we could ever live like this in the daylight. The question pierced me, because it was one I had asked myself for years but had never said aloud. I wanted to tell him yes, that of course we could, that love was strong enough to survive anything. But honesty weighed too heavily on me, and all I could whisper was, I don't know. He closed his eyes, nodding slightly, like he had expected that answer but still needed to hear it. That was the hardest part, knowing that we weren't just afraid of each other, we were afraid of the world outside, the stares, the judgments, the whispers that would follow us. For a while we sat in that truth, both of us wrestling silently with what it meant. Then, as if sensing I was drowning in my own thoughts, he leaned closer and placed his head against my chest. The simple gesture nearly undid me. I wrapped my arm around him, holding him there, listening to the way his breathing slowly calmed in rhythm with mine. In that position, I realized something important. Maybe we didn't need all the answers yet. Maybe the daylight didn't matter tonight. What mattered was that, here and now, in the soft cocoon of a quiet car at the edge of dawn, he trusted me enough to let his guard down. That trust was everything. I let my fingers trace idle patterns across his back, gentle and slow, and felt him sink deeper against me. The closeness wasn't about passion, it was about safety, about knowing that for the first time we didn't have to hide from ourselves. I wanted to freeze us there forever, but the pale glow of morning was creeping steadily higher, daring to pull us apart. He whispered that he didn't want to go home, that the thought of walking back into his house and pretending like this night hadn't happened made his stomach twist. His honesty struck a chord in me, because I felt exactly the same. I told him I didn't want it to end either, but that no matter what, this night was ours. No one could take it away. The way his eyes softened when I said that made my chest ache. He lifted his head just enough to meet my gaze again, and for a moment we just stared at each other, two people on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. Our lips didn't meet, but they hovered close, the air between us buzzing with what we both wanted but were too afraid to claim. And maybe that restraint made it even more powerful, because I knew when it finally happened, it wouldn't just be a kiss, it would be the answer to every question we hadn't dared to ask. As the first rays of morning light slipped across the horizon, casting a faint glow across his face, I felt an ache in my chest so deep it was almost unbearable. The night had given us something we had both been searching for, but the morning was coming to test if we were strong enough to hold on to it. The first light of morning spilled across the horizon, thin and pale, washing the world outside in soft shades of gold and gray. Inside the car, though, everything still felt suspended, as if the night had stretched its arms just a little longer to protect us. He was still leaning close, his face half lit by the rising sun, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The quiet between us was no longer uncertain, it had settled into something steady, something unshakable. My hand remained wrapped around his, and the warmth of his skin against mine felt like an anchor, reminding me that this was real, not a dream I would wake from. Yet with every minute the sky grew brighter, and with it came the weight of the questions we hadn't answered. He finally pulled back just enough to look at me fully, his eyes tired but shining in a way that made my chest ache. He whispered that he was scared of what would happen once we stepped out of this car, out of this cocoon we had built through the night. His words trembled, heavy with the fear that the outside world would demand we hide again, pretend again, shrink ourselves back into shadows we had fought so hard to escape for just these few hours. I listened, and I felt the same fear crawling inside me, but for the first time I didn't let it win. I told him that no matter what the world said, no matter how loud the doubts or the stares might become, what we had found tonight was worth holding on to. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, maybe we would stumble, maybe we would get hurt, but that didn't mean it wasn't real, or that it wasn't ours. He stared at me with an intensity that nearly unraveled me, and then slowly, almost cautiously, he leaned forward. His lips brushed mine in the softest kiss, so brief and trembling it almost felt like a question. My heart surged, and I answered without words, leaning into him, deepening it just enough to let him know I wanted it too. It wasn't perfect. Our lips were clumsy, our breaths uneven, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the truth of it, the way it silenced every fear we had carried through the night. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested together, and we laughed quietly, not because anything was funny but because we couldn't believe we had finally let ourselves have this. The morning sun grew stronger, spilling light across the lot, and we both knew we couldn't stay hidden forever. He sighed, resting his head against my shoulder one last time, and whispered that he wasn't ready to say goodbye. I told him we didn't have to. Maybe the night was ending, but this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something we had been too afraid to claim until now. We sat there for a few more minutes, holding on to the silence, memorizing the way it felt to exist without masks, without walls, just two people who had found each other in the most unexpected place. When he finally pulled back, there was no sadness in his eyes, only a quiet determination, as though he had decided, just like I had, that we weren't going to let fear steal this from us. The drive back was slow, the streets empty, the world still waking up. Neither of us spoke much, but we didn't need to. His hand never left mine, resting between us on the seat like a small but powerful declaration. When I dropped him off at his house, he lingered at the door, looking back at me with a smile that was soft but unshakably certain. And in that moment I understood something I hadn't before: love doesn't begin with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it starts quietly, in the glow of a drive-in screen, in the silence of a parked car, in the gentle slide of a hand over yours. Sometimes it begins with fear, but if you let it, it grows into courage. And as I watched him walk up those steps, the sun fully risen now, I knew the night had changed everything. Not because it gave us all the answers, but because it gave us the strength to start asking the right questions, together.